But we decided we're going to spend 3 weeks today really drilling into what marriage is supposed to be, drilling into a major component of marriage, because there's so many different ways that we could talk about this kind of thing. So we're taking 3 weeks. We're going to drill real heavy into one issue, one tension that a lot of married people kind of have. All right, and we'll certainly understand. Now, if you're here and you're not married yet, okay, and you're young and you play, this is one of those series. It's short enough, but you could kind of stick some things in your pocket, kind of prepare you for when you do get married eventually, all that kind of stuff. It's good for you. So I'm glad that you're here. And some of you have been married a long, long time, and you're going to be like, wow, I wish I had heard this, however many years ago. Kind of stay with me, because what we said was, as we kind of start this thing, is we said that when we come to marriage, okay, that all of us come to marriage with a box of desires, a box of hopes and dreams, and they're all the things that we dream about when we're younger, and because we grew up in a great home, or maybe you didn't grow up in a great home, and it's all the things you don't, you want to do that you never had, or maybe repeat some of the things you had. But we all come, right? And we all come with certain, desires, and, what kind of home we're going to live in. And, we talk with our potential spouse about children and how many children, and maybe we'll wait for a while, or maybe we'll wait a longer while, or maybe there's enough children in the world and we won't have any. And some of us, we come with these, thoughts and hopes, and boy, I hope my wife never, and, and these kind of, but, and others are like, what, it won't matter. He doesn't care. He loves the way I am. And, and we have all these things. And what happens is that we have these, and there's nothing wrong with having them. And I want you to hear that there's nothing wrong with having these. We all have them, right? Because they're our hopes, they're our dreams, it's our desires for what we look to for marriage and for our partner. But the problem we kind of unpacked last week was the idea that we walk into marriage and we walk down the aisles in a lot of ways with this, but this turns into this. And what was a hope and a desire and a dream all of a sudden becomes an expectation. And we walk down the aisle and we plop this on our spouse, and we're like, okay, when? And, we talked about it, and it hasn't happened yet. And you promised, and you said, and come on, this is, you said you would, and I didn't, you're not, and I'm. And what happens is, and what we said last week, is that these expectations change the nature of the relationship. Now, to give you a definition of what expectations are, here's a quick definition. Expectations are, it's a strong belief that something should happen. In other words, we talked about it. You said. We had the discussion. You promised. And so the expectation is that there's a strong belief that something should. There's no discussion. There's no going back on this. It should happen, and it better happen sooner or later. That's what an expectation is. But what we learned through this is that when your hopes, your natural hopes and dreams and desires turn into expectations, the nature of your relationship changes. And all of a sudden, what was based on love and all these kind of things, when you were dating and you just couldn't have enough of each other and all these kind of things, all of a sudden your relationship becomes what we called a debt-debtor relationship. Go ahead and pull up that next slide, would you? Not that one. The one with the graph on it, the picture. Is there one on there with a picture? It should be, with the two boxes. That one. There you go. So what the hopes and dreams and desires, when they become expectations, our relationship devolves into a debt-debtor relationship. In other words, you owe me and I owe you. And these two big I's in the relationship take over. And now, like last week, we talked about, there's the compromise and there's the control, and the one who does, can argue the better, and we convince, and we do all these kind of things. And this debtor relationship, what we said last week was, when your relationship becomes this, and it is a you owe me and I owe you and now you better and all these kind of things, it erodes the intimacy. It erodes the opportunity for your spouse to give you unconditional love, right? It erodes. It's like this. Imagine this for just a minute. If I owed you money, I could not give you money. Could I? If I owed you money, I could not give you money. Why? Because if I were to give you some money, what would you say? Well, you already owed that to me anyways. So if I decided to give you a gift of money, but I owed you money, I don't get any credit for that because I'm just getting back what you owe me. That's what we're talking about. That when our desires and dreams turn into expectations, now your spouse is trying to live up to the bar that you've established. And if they do fulfill a desire or a dream that you've always had, but it has become an expectation, now they don't get credit for that. Well, that's what wives do, isn't it? That's just what a husband does, isn't it? I mean, can I expect isn't that what they, she said and he said. And so when they actually fulfill a dream of yours, they don't get credit. And we talked about that last week. There's no way in which your spouse can give to you. You won't be able to receive it. You won't be able to give it. The idea of unconditional love, so long as your relationship is about expectation. And that's what we talked about. And here's the deal. As I even talk about this, there's a pushback. As I even talk about this, there's a yeah, but, and yeah, but he said, and yeah, but she said, and can I expect him? Can I expect her? I mean, after all, this was our agreement. And you can live this way. I'm not telling you can't live this way. There's a lot of marriages that live this way. There's a lot of relationships that live this way. And they do what we talked about. There's that compromise thing. And, and I'm watching you, you're watching me. All I'm saying is that if you keep it like this, it erodes the intimacy in relationship, and it has no room for your spouse to be able to give to you unconditional love, to fulfill your dreams. And it just can't happen because it's all, well, you owe me, of course. Right? So we're talking about this. And we said last week, in talking about control, the whole debtor thing, go back to that graph, would you? The debtor thing, it's all about control. You will, and I'm watching you, and you're watching me, and I know, and you didn't, and I'm not, and all these kind of things kind of goes out the window. And we control people. And here's the deal. For Christians, they use what we could call Bible darts, right? Because you know the Bible a little bit. And so, you'll pull out the Bible and you go like, you're supposed to love me. Oh, yes, well, you're supposed to submit. Oh, and we use Bible darts and we throw Bible darts at each other. And that's not how we're supposed to manage marriage. It's not a you better because God said and you say, whatever. That's just a big iMarriage with a cross hanging around its neck. That's not the kind of marriage that we're going to talk about today. That's not God's intention for this. That's just another way to manipulate and try to control and try to get your box figured out, right? That's not what this is. So last week, I left you with a question. And the answer to this question, let me just say this to everybody in the room, okay? I recognize each and every week that most of the people I'm talking to, you would consider yourself a Christian. You're a God follower, right? You've got Jesus in your heart, the whole deal. That's you, for most of you, but not all of you. But here's the thing, that as I unpack and we answer the question that I left with you with last week, you had some homework. Those of you that were here, you're supposed to answer a question. The question was, what does your spouse owe you, right? You're supposed to figure that out. Well, the answer to that question, here's the deal. If you're not a Christian, my answer for you is not going to make any sense whatsoever. It's not. In fact, if you're not a Christian, what I'm going to talk about today really doesn't apply to you. And if you were to come to me and you didn't want to be a Christian and all that kind of stuff, but you're like, Mick, I'm feeling the tension you're talking about. What can my spouse, what do we do? How do we handle it? We're not Christians, so what do we do? And my only advice to you would be, well, you got to kind of figure out the compromise thing we talked about, because that's really the only answer if you're not a Christian. But if you are a Christian, God does give us an answer. And it's going to be tough today, so kind of hold on to your seats. Stay with me as I go through this whole thing. But to answer this question, what does your spouse owe you? The short answer is nothing. Nothing. Your spouse does not owe you anything. To which a lot, I get it. There's going to be this constant pushback, and you're going through, and you're like, yeah, you're just a preacher, and it's nice that you have a good marriage, but in the real world, here's how it works, and yeah, but, pushback. If I did, stay with me. Stay with me today. I get it. But I left you with this last week, and I'll say it again. You can write it down. I didn't put it on the slide. But something that happy couples know is that they owe their spouse everything, but are owed nothing in return. Happy couples know that they owe their spouse everything, but are owed nothing in return. This is where we're going today. So buckle up, put your seatbelts on, because this is going to be tough. We're going to be in the book of Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 5. Before we jump into Ephesians chapter 5, I want to give you a little bit of background here. Because the principles we find throughout the New Testament, in particular, Paul and Peter and the writers of the New Testament, everything they wrote and all the application, in particular, Paul today, as he talks about marriage, he took and applied the teachings of Jesus. Okay? And I need you to understand that it started with Jesus. And in John chapter 13, right before Jesus was arrested, put on trial, crucified, rose again 3 days, and all of that, whole thing kind of went off. All right, here's what he said. Some of you are familiar with this. Jesus said this in John 13. So now, he said to his disciples, I am giving you a new commandment. Pause. Remember earlier, he had condensed all the law and the prophets to 2 commandments. You remember what they are? I'll fill you in. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself, love others. Okay? Those were the 2 commandments. All the law and the prophets, Jesus said, boiled down to 2 things. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. That's it. But now, he looks at his disciples and he says, I'm giving you a new commandment. To love each other. That's the disciples. That would be then turn out to be the church, believers. We become a family. I want you to love each other. Now, here's the key. Watch. Just as I have loved you. Don't miss this. Pay attention. Look at me. Don't miss this. Because as you fast forward throughout the New Testament, you will find that most, if not all, of the admonitions by the writers in the New Testament all connect the admonitions, the things they want you to do, to Jesus and God and how God has treated us. And so he adds this new commandment and he says, I want you to love each other, not just because you should, or because it's a good thing, or because it's the law, or anything else. He says, your love for each other should come because motivated by the fact that I have loved you. So hold on to that. Now go to Ephesians chapter 5. Paul now takes that understanding and he applies it directly to the marriage relationship. And I want you to see this. Look at this now. He starts in Matthew chapter 5, and he says this in verse 21. And further, submit to one another. Now he's talking about marriage. Submit to one another. Why? Out of reverence for Christ. It's directly connected to our reverence. In other words, we are to submit to one another out of reverence. Similar, our reverence for Christ, who he is to us, what he is to us. He's our Savior, our Lord, our Master. And because of that reverence, and what reverence is, it's a, that's the reverence. The awe, the, because of that, out of that reverence, that thing that we feel for God, he said, now I want you to submit to one another. Now, here's what he's talking about. And we'll get into the details in a second. Watch. Submitting to one another means, my wife, come here. I'm going to use my wife as she doesn't get to be in here very often, because she's usually doing kids. By the way, she needs help in the children's ministry if anyone wants to help. Okay? Remember, each of us came, she had a box, I had a box. What submit to one another means is I put down my box and I pick up her box. Pick up the box. In other words, I set my box aside and now her box is more important to me than my box. That's what submission to one another means. That I have a box still, and hopefully we're going to talk about how to turn it back into desires from expectations. We both have a box, but what this verse means is that her box is now more important to me than my box. So instead of me walking around going, hey, honey, you promised, come on, here's my box, you got to hold on to it. No. I set my box aside and I take her box and I elevate her box over my box. That I submit to her. And here's the key. Thank you. I was going to kiss you. You didn't want to kiss. But here's the key. Listen. Again, it's not, it says submit to one another. So she better because I did and I, no. This is not a, if you will, then I will. No. This is, I will, regardless of what you do. That I am deciding that your box is more important than my box. That's what a good Christian marriage is. A good Christian marriage puts the other's desires ahead of my own. And instead of my rattling the box and going, come on, honey, you haven't done what I said. Come on, you promised and you did. No. Now, I set aside. Now, I don't get rid of it. Look, I'm not suggesting that we take our whole box. The answer in this is not we just dump it out and we don't have a box. And no, we all have boxes. We all have boxes. And we're going to talk about what to do with the stuff in our box. But today is all about recognizing that it begins by saying, I have a box, I get it, but your box is more important to me than my box. That's what it means to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Christians, this is why I told you, if you're not a believer in the room, this isn't going to make sense because you really don't have any reverence for Christ. You maybe believe or you maybe he's a great guy or, I'm not blaspheming Jesus all the time, but, you don't have an inner sense of reverence for him that will motivate you to begin submitting to your spouse and making their box more important. It just won't make sense to you. But to every Christian in the room, this is crucial. Now, he goes on, and he starts this way. Watch this now. He says, for wives, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. There it is again. There's that connection to Christ. That it's, it doesn't say, wives, submit to your husband because he deserves it. Submit to your husbands because he's worthy. Submit to your husbands because he's going to reciprocate and he's going to do everything he promised. That's not what it says. It says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Now, pause for just a minute. Let me fill this in. For a lot of Christians and people outside of Christianity, we get to that verse and people are like, see, the Bible is antiquated. And what do you mean submit to my husband? And who does he think he is? And all. I get it. I get it. Here's why that bothers us. Here's why that bothers us. Because in our culture, we have embraced equality in marriage. Rightly so. Right? Because where we started clearly showed equality. When God created men and women, they were created both in the image of God. That when it comes to men and women, there is absolutely no difference in value. And we embrace that. So when we come to this and we think, oh my goodness, I'm supposed to obey, I'm supposed to submit to myself, my husband and authority and all those kind of things. Hold on. We push back because of our culture and because we already understand equality. But in Jesus' day, in Paul's day, when Paul said this to his audience, they would not have been like, they wouldn't have had our reaction. Their reaction would have been, well, duh, right? It's like, yeah, we have to, because in the Roman world, the husband had absolute legal authority over his spouse and his children. He could do anything he wanted. Right? Now that's not part of our culture, but that in that day and age, that was, women couldn't vote, women couldn't even be witnesses in a courtroom because they weren't considered worthy. That's why the story of the resurrection of Jesus, by the way, and all the narratives that point to the women finding him first and testifying to his resurrection, nobody in that day would have, if they were making up a story, would have said women found him first. Because nobody in that day would have said women had any kind of credibility. It just wouldn't have happened. But here's what you need to see. He starts here, helping wives understand something they already get, but then he goes here. Look what he says in this next verse. For husbands, this means love your wives. Look, just as Christ loved the church, and he gave up his life for her. To which all the men in his audience would have been, what? What? A time out. What are you talking about? I'm the one, are you suggesting I'm supposed to sacrifice for my wife and kids? Come on, they're here for me. I'm not here for them. Listen. Don't miss this. Paul was introducing the idea of equality in marriage long before anybody else did. And by him telling husbands, no. This is about submitting to her. This is about putting her before yourself, like Christ did when he died on the cross. To which all the men are going, what? That's crazy. And the word love here is the same word. It's the agape love. The unconditional, sacrificial, never-ending kind of love. And he just smacked all the men in his audience with a 2x4. And it went absolutely contrary. Right? That's why he did it. But what I want you to notice, and that was a little side note, a little extra, okay? What you need to understand is that, again, for husbands, the connection is as Christ loved the church, that your love, your sacrifice, your devotion, your loyalty, all of that is poured into your wife, just as Christ did it for you. And see, and that's the hard part. Because we want to go, well, but Pastor, if you knew my story, if you knew my husband, if you knew my wife, if you knew that, you'd give me a pass. I would have you come sit over here, you the exception clause, you get to sit over here if you knew my story. Because we all have stories, right? But the truth of the matter is this. There is no exception. That the way we behave, the submitting to one another, the loving our spouse, the submitting to our spouse is not because they earned it, they deserve it, whatever. It's something you do regardless of what they do. See, again, this isn't a control and I'm going to control you and you control and let's do, no. That's not what this is. So, the bottom of your outline, why? Because God did for us. Because God did for us. You go through the scriptures and you'll find Romans chapter 5, he loved. Ephesians chapter 4, he forgave. Romans chapter 15, he accepted us. That you and I as Christians have to understand that Christ died for us while we were still sinners. That before we ever repented, before we ever said, I'm sorry, before we ever said, I want to be better, before we did any of that, he died for us. In other words, his actions on the cross were not contingent upon our actions. And he says, and because I did that for you, because I loved you before you ever loved me, because I accepted you before you ever accepted me, before I forgave you, right? He said, now take that and pour it out on your spouse. And that's weird for us, right? But here's what we need to know. Here's what we need to know. The answer is not replacing the I with our spouse's first letter, right? That's not what this is. Remember, it's connected to Christ. And the reason that I put her desires above my own is not because I'm trying to put her, it's because of what Jesus did for us. And the answer and the motivation for this decision is in the inviting of a third party into the marriage. And Jesus now becomes front and center. That because I'm loved, I love in return. I submit to my spouse, not because they've earned it, because Jesus did it for me. This idea of inviting Jesus in, making him front and center in your relationship will change everything. Submit to one another. So a conversation with God kind of goes like this. God, we're having a talk with God and it's like, God, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for you, for forgiving me, for dying for me, for loving me, for restoring my relationship with God the Father. And Jesus, you made all that happen. And I'm so grateful, God, for that. I'm so grateful for all that you've done for me. God, what can I do for you? God says, okay. I want you to take all of that gratitude and all of that wonder that comes because you realize what I've done for you, and I want you to pour it out on your spouse. And I want you to take all of that and channel it on them and love them in such an extraordinary fashion because of your reverence and your gratitude to me. Pour it out. And you and I, in that moment, we want to say, is there anything else I can do? Maybe I'll tithe a little bit more. Maybe I'll start serving in the nursery. God is, because, come on, God, it's just you and me. It has nothing to do with my wife. And God says that's not the case. that you cannot sit here as a Christian, think you have it going on with God and everything with you is God because you drive down the road and, ooh, you got all the ooey gooeys in the song that just made you want to just be happy, happy, happy. And you saw a little cloud and it's like, ooh, I think God just did that. He spoke to me. Ooh, I got it going on with God. Right? And I got it going on with God, but you can't get along with your spouse and you're fighting and you're just bickering and arguing all the time. But man, when I get in the car and turn on the radio, got Christian radio, ooh, I feel good with God. Doesn't work that way. You cannot have it going on with God and not have it going on with your spouse. God says, if you revere me, if you're grateful to me, if you have this wonder and awe at what I've done for you, now turn around and pour it out on your spouse. But God, have you seen her? Have you been paying attention? God, have you been paying attention to him and what he says and what he does? And, come on, God, he's not doing what he's supposed to. He doesn't even come to church, God. Really? Listen, here's what you need to have. You need to understand. God says to you and I that you are my number one tool and method in demonstrating my love for your spouse. This is the cool part about marriage. That marriage and how God created it is a picture of God's relationship with his people. The church is called the bride of Christ throughout the New Testament. Marriage is intended to be a picture of God's relationship with us. So when you got married, God said, I want you to demonstrate to your spouse the way I have loved you, the way I have forgiven you, the way I have poured everything on you when you didn't deserve it. Now do that for your spouse. They are the number one source of recognizing God's love. And you are that tool demonstrating that. You see, we conduct our marriages not in the shadow of two big eyes that just want to get their way and, and me and my. But we conduct our marriages in the shadow of a cross. And for Christians, that makes all the difference. It should. So how do we do this? Couple quick things, real quick. Number one, change your thinking. Change your thinking. In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. All of this is understanding how God created marriage and why. And understanding that it's in our culture, in our world, it's all about expectation. I expect, you expect, we better, we got the compromise thing, all the stuff we talked about last week. But we've got to change our thinking. We've got to transform our expectations back into desires. And for some of us, it's kind of like this. We talked about it a little bit. It's sort of like this, right? We all got one of these, all right? We all got the story. Pastor, you don't understand, right? Pastor, if I don't kind of keep her on a tight leash, if I don't keep him on a tight leash, he's just gonna or she's just gonna, And so, I'm helping him. I'm helping her. Aren't I helping you, honey? Yeah, just like that, right? I'm helping. This is good for you because, and we use this as a form of control. And it's a way for us to kind of, ooh, honey, you did really good last night. There you go. You get a little bit more. Okay, good job. But if you're late tomorrow, we're going to have a conversation. And we have this and we use it to manipulate and control. And, because if she doesn't, he won't, not, Pastor, you don't know. If I just drop that, we don't know the trouble. Man, Pastor, you don't understand. He'll go and buy blank or she can't handle $5. We're gonna be broke. I can't let go of the rope. And the truth is this, look, you can hold on to the rope. You can live like this. You can just, okay, good job, honey. Okay, great job. Ooh, yes, isn't that wonderful? You can do that. You can live like this. But so long as you're thinking, so long as you're connected to this and holding on to this rope and you promise her, and it becomes a tug of war, and she's on the other side, and it's just a tug of war kind of thing, your relationship will never experience unconditional love. There's no room for you to express it or receive it. We've got to change the way we think. God designed marriage this way because he wanted you to know how much he loves you. He didn't want to remain some intangible, invisible God out there giving you some ooey gooey feelings, right? God designed and created marriage so that we could, in a very tangible way, experience his love through our spouse. We are to reflect his love in a physical way, tangible way, a touchable way, present with you kind of way. You are that tool. But here's the thing, and I get it because for some of you, you're like, whoa, I'm the number one tool for her to experience God's love. That's heavy. But let me ask you something. Wouldn't you like to be the recipient of that kind of love? Wouldn't you love for your spouse to do that for you? To pour out themselves and to let you feel the love of God like never before? Wouldn't you love to receive that? I think we all would. We've got to change our thinking. Here's the thing. You know what it's called when you control somebody's behavior with a rope like this? Give and take and kind of control where they're going and what they're doing. You know what that's called? Parenting. That's parenting, right? And we should do that with our kids because we're trying to train our kids, teach our kids, help our kids, guide them where they're going when they're young especially. But none of you signed up for marriage for another one of those, right? We don't want another parent guiding us and, yanking and controlling, right? That's not what we signed up for. And the second thing is we have to decide. Well, on your outline, the second thing here is we have to do this one expectation at a time. One expectation at a time. And as you try to figure out what this is and try to get it from here to here, you've got to be asking yourself, what's in your box? Hopefully you've been doing that this week, right? The homework you went home with last week was, what does your spouse owe you? Part of that was trying to figure out what's in your box. Because we all have a box. And the answer is just dump out the box. The answer is we got to turn it from an expectation to a desire. You got to get it back into this category, right? Do it one expectation at a time. But ultimately, here's where you've got to go today. You have to decide. You have to decide that your spouse doesn't owe you, but you owe them. Let me say that again. Understanding what we're talking about today, you have to decide, my spouse doesn't owe me anything, but I owe them everything. See, that's Christian marriage. Christian marriage is not about this. It's about putting them first. They don't owe me, but I do owe them. So, Here's kind of your homework, if you will. I put some things at the bottom of your outline, but here's what you need to do. After today, you and your spouse need to sit down and you need to ask the question of your spouse. What is in your box? Honey, tell me what's in your box. What are your hopes and dreams for this marriage? What are some of the things? Yes, we might have talked about it, but I want to hear it again. And then, listen. You ask them this question, what is in your box? And then you stop talking. Stop talking. Ask them what's in the box, what's in their box, and then don't talk. Because some of us, we're going to want to, as they start bringing up, well, yeah, but you've changed your mind. Ask them what's in the box, give them the floor, and just stop talking. And listen. Listen for their heart. Listen for their dreams and their hopes. And take notes so that you can start answering it for them and start doing things as they seek to move these back to desires. You can start working on how do I fulfill my spouse's desire? How do I fulfill those dreams if possible? So ask them what's in their box and then don't talk. Let them talk. Okay? Now, I'll say this and we're done. Okay? For some of you, this entire message, there has been a big objection. There's been a big yeah, but, and I told you at the beginning, it was going to be like this. Because those of you, us, all of us, who are holding on to this rope, there's this thing. And if we dug down, it basically boils down to, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. Pastor, if I drop this rope, I'm afraid he'll. If I drop this rope, Pastor, I'm afraid she'll do this. He'll do that. I'm afraid. Here's the thing. Listen. I said before, you can manage your marriage like this. You can live like this. A lot of people do. But there is no hope until you let go of the rope. There is no hope for you to experience, to receive, and give the unconditional love of God to your spouse and receive it in return so long as you hold onto this rope. There is no hope of ever experiencing what God wants for your marriage so long as you hold on to this. There is no hope. You have to trust. But here's the deal, and this is going to break a lot of you. Listen. There is no guarantee. There is no guarantee that you drop that and everything is awesome. This is not a formula. This is not I heard a message on Sunday and I dropped the rope on Monday and by Thursday it's the honeymoon again. Woo-hoo-hoo! No. There are no guarantees. No guarantees your spouse is going to respond the way you think or want. No guarantees whatsoever. All I'm telling you is this. There is no hope for your marriage, for you to invite God into your marriage, to experience the love that He has for you and wants for you desperately, for each other, so long as you hold on to this rope. There's no hope. So what do you got to lose? Let's bow our heads and close.